Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Home Affairs Select Committee. This is a session part of our routine scrutiny of the work of the Home Secretary and the Home Office. And can I welcome the Home Secretary to this meeting this morning? We're very pleased to see you. Also welcome the Permanent Secretary, and we're very pleased to see Dan O'Mahony again. Marnie. Oh, sorry, Marnie. We saw you very recently, and you obviously have the role of the clandestine Channel Threat Commander. So we're very pleased that you're with us today. Just want to make a few brief remarks. It's 9 months since we were able to question a Home Secretary, and obviously a lot has happened since February of this year, with the Rwanda announcement, the crisis at Manston, and our report in the summer on the small boat crossings. So we've got many questions that we want to ask today, and we will start with the issue around asylum seekers, the Channel boat crossings and Manston. But I think it's also right that we remember today that we are coming up to the 1-year anniversary of those 27 who lost their lives crossing the Channel. And also that we recognise in the last few days the sad news of the death of a man who had been detained at Manston. We also note the welcome news that Manston was cleared just before the Home Secretary's appearance at this Select Committee. And it does beg the question why the crisis at Manston was allowed to grow over such an extended period if it has been cleared now. And just finally, I just want to say I am particularly disappointed that a letter dated the 2nd of November from the chairs of 4 select committees, Justice, the Joint Committee on Human Rights and Women and Equalities, plus myself, has not been responded to by the Home Office. We asked for a response by the 16th of November, and that letter arose out of the very disturbing evidence that we heard at our session on Manston. So that is very disappointing that we haven't had the answer to the specific questions that we raised in that letter. And that then leads me on to my specific questions. And these are mainly factual questions that I just want to get some clarity on. So first of all, can I just ask how many judicial reviews have been launched against the Home Office for illegal detention at Manston as of today? Who can tell me that?
Well, if I may, Madam Chair, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to the committee. I really value the opportunity for accountability and transparency. You note the, I should say at the outset that, I also want to offer my condolences and my thoughts in memory of those 27 who perished almost a year ago on the Channel, taking a lethal, dangerous journey. And it is a tragedy on a scale that is unacceptable. And I'm very, very sorry and saddened that happened. And any loss of life in this instance is of great sadness. I also want to put on record my heartfelt condolences to all those affected by the death of the person who arrived recently at Manston. There's very little I can say about that because there is an inquest and a coroner's inquiry going on to that. But I do want to put on record on behalf of the Home Office and everyone who works on the front line in these very challenging circumstances, our thoughts for those who are directly affected. You also mentioned the letter of the 16th of November. I must say I apologise for not getting a reply back to you.
2nd of November we wrote.
Sorry, 2nd of November with the deadline of the 16th of November. There has been a processing issue in the Home Office, and we will endeavour to respond very quickly, but I am happy to take any of the questions that are raised in that letter today. The question you asked me about now is how many judicial reviews we are actually facing. I mean, I speak as someone who was a lawyer employed to defend the Home Office before I was an MP on judicial review. So the number will be very high. I mean, in terms of the total number of judicial reviews that the Home Office is dealing with.
Next issue, on the issue of Manston and illegal detention.
I don't have the number, Chair, but we will write to you with
I'm
it.
told it's 4.
That-
You don't know? You don't know how many judicial reviews on Manston have been launched?
We know that there are judicial reviews on Manston, and we are dealing with them as you would expect in a holistic way. I personally didn't know that there were 4, but we will.
Okay, you don't, okay. I'm rather surprised, if you don't mind me saying. I'm rather surprised you didn't think I might ask that question. But anyway, okay. I just want to be clear now then on the legal status of Manston. So could you just confirm? I don't know if this is the permanent secretary who can confirm this. Is Manston a holding room, and therefore detention is only allowed up to 24 hours? Is that correct?
Well, the Manston Processing Centre is there as fundamentally a centre for a short-term facility for processing. People arrive and I'll
We know what happens there. I just want to know what the legal status is. Is it a holding room in law? Do you want to...
It's a short-term holding facility.
Yes, but is it a holding room as set out in the rules?
It's equivalent to a holding room, which means that we can, under the rules, keep people there for 24 hours, apart from in exceptional circumstances.
Okay, so that's helpful. So it's a holding room, and then in the exceptional circumstances, you can then hold people for a further period of detention. Under the rules, it's very clear that if you want to use that provision and extend detention, there has to be an authorisation made before the 24 hours runs out. So perhaps you're best placed to tell me, did that happen for everybody who was held at Manston beyond 24 hours?
Yeah, there's a process of, at director level, signing off the exceptional circumstances that we can hold people beyond 24 hours. Probably also worth saying there is another legal obligation upon the department, which is to provide accommodation to stop people from being destitute. So, I mean, clearly there were people staying at Manston in excess of 24 hours, but it's also really, really important that we find alternative accommodation when the alternative is destitution.
Was that the exceptional circumstance that was put on for each individual that you were extending the period of detention for?
Those were the exceptional circumstances that led to us keeping people there for more than 24 hours.
Okay, I think we'll come on to this, but why was that an exceptional circumstance? Because we all know that the numbers projected for this year were going to exceed the 28,500 from last year coming across on the small boats. So, sorry, I'm not quite clear why this was exceptional. Why did the Home Office not have plans in place to deal with the numbers?
So, as we discussed on your visit, currently the primary accommodation that we offer to asylum seekers is hotels, and the provision of hotels, a commercial process that we had to go through, the engagement with local MPs and local authorities became very, very difficult, increasingly difficult.
Why did it become very difficult?
Sorry?
Why did it become very difficult?
I mean, there are a range of reasons. One is, market supply has become much more difficult, compared to last year when, hotels didn't have people staying in them in the way that they do now.
You've been able to clear it. I mean, we started off by saying that you'd cleared Manston, so I'm a bit confused as to why you're saying hotels were not available, because you've clearly found hotels to put people in now.
Yeah, I mean, the other factor that has worked in our favour over the last few weeks is that the weather has deteriorated significantly, so the number of crossings has dropped. So the number of crossings this November is significantly lower than it was last November, for instance.
The crisis was developing, wasn't it? When I'm looking at the numbers, in August you had nearly 8,500, and then in September 7,900, October 6,900. So you knew these numbers were coming because you were working on the basis of 60,000 people crossing the channel, weren't you?
We certainly anticipated that the numbers would be worse than last year, yes.
Okay.
If I can provide some context as well, and Dan is absolutely correct in everything he said. I think what's happened is we have, during the month of September, it was obvious that there were already an unprecedented, or at least very, very high number of people who were arriving illegally at Dover. We were trying to procure extra accommodation urgently and at pace. It has become incredibly difficult to find accommodation, and that is because of a combination of several factors. We've got an unprecedented number of people arriving here illegally.
Well, I don't think that's the case, Home Secretary. If I could
it
just interrupt you there, because actually the numbers are not unprecedented. If you look back to 2002, the number of people claiming asylum was almost twice the claims that you had last year. So I don't think that's actually correct, and that's in our report that we produced in the summer.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. The facts are, this is the first time we have had, before the end of the year, by the autumn, 40,000 people arrive illegally at the UK through a dangerous route where they are vulnerable.
Not
where
disputing the issue
Can I
of
just
the
finish
numbers?
explaining some of the context that I've been dealing with?
Absolutely, but the key is we haven't got that much time.
Yeah.
There's lots of questions we want to ask.
Yeah.
I've got lots of members who want to come in on this. Perhaps I could just move you on to what you actually decided to do as Home Secretary, because there's been lots of media coverage of what happened during September and October. And I just want to ask you, when did you first become aware that there was this crisis developing at Manston? And when were you told that you were potentially in breach of the law by holding people?
Well, I arrived at the Home Office at the beginning of the September in full awareness that there was a crisis with illegal migration.
Right.
Because of the very high, and I just have to finish the point that I was making. There is an unprecedented level of pressure on our asylum accommodation system at the moment. We've never seen 40,000 people arrive in the UK through dangerous and illegal means. We've never had 140,000 people welcomed in good faith, and rightly so, from Ukraine, who are to some degree taking up some of our accommodation. We've never seen, in addition to that, another 80,000 people who we are accommodating who are waiting for their asylum claims. That all takes up beds and accommodation and a state. It is becoming incredibly difficult to source accommodation, suitable shelter for the unprecedented levels of people coming into this country. We are competing with prisons who want to release people to go into accommodation. We are competing with constituents
With the greatest
who want
respect, the
local
committee's very
authority
well
housing.
aware of the context.
But that is important context to explain
Could
why
you explain
it has
to
been
us,
very
though,
difficult
Could you
to
explain
source the
what
accommodation.
you did when you came in as Home Secretary? You're saying you knew there was a crisis. So when were you told of the developing problem at Manston, that people could only be held for 24 hours? There was exceptional circumstances to extend that, we understand, to a maximum of 5 days. So when were you told that the Home Office was breaching the law?
As I said, when I first arrived at the Home Office at the beginning of September, I was incredibly aware of the pressure at
But when were you
Manston,
told you were breaching the law?
and I was putting into place, and I will invite the Permanent Secretary to confirm exactly what happened.
My question's quite specific. When were you told that the Home Office was breaching the law around detaining people for more
We'll
than
get to that
24 days?
point, but I need to tell you what I did in September and what I knew. That's what I'm
When,
trying to
well,
do.
we just need a day. When were you told? You started as Home Secretary. How many days later were you told about the problem? Was it day
I
one?
would really
Did the
like to
Home
finish my
Secretary
answer.
Tell us, when were you
So I'm
told?
trying to tell you what I knew and what I did
Okay, well, please
when I
tell us
first was
then.
appointed as Home Secretary.
Okay,
Right. So when I arrived at the beginning of September at the Home Office, I was very much aware that there were very high levels of numbers coming in to Dover. I was very aware that there were there's an acute need to source accommodation urgently and quickly. And that's why during the month of September, we brought on many hotels and many beds.
with the greatest respect, my specific question to you is, when did your officials tell you that there was a developing problem at Manston and that you were breaching the law?
Right. Well, I will answer that in a straightforward way, and I'll have to repeat myself. I was aware from the beginning of my tenure that there was a problem at Manston. When it comes to legal advice, which you're asking specifically about, it is a government convention that we don't talk about the issuance or the content of legal advice. But what I will say is that in every decision that I've made, both as Home Secretary and as generally a minister, and I say this as a former Attorney General, I have always, whenever I've been provided with legal advice by officials, I have always taken it into account, read it, listened to it when it's been delivered to me orally, and borne it in mind when decisions have to be made.
Okay.
If you're suggesting that I either wasn't told about legal advice
Not
or I
suggesting
deliberately
anything.
ignored it, that is simply not
I'm
true.
not suggesting anything.
I cannot, for convention reasons, and also because we are facing
Okay.
a legal challenge, get into the specifics about what legal advice and when was
Okay.
given.
Right, so
And can I just invite the Home Secretary to add anything that he might want to add about what happened?
I can confirm, Chair, that what Home Secretary said is accurate, that the Home Office officials made the Home Secretary aware of the legal
Right.
position as well as policy options from the beginning of her tenure.
Right, thank you. I want to put to you this then. It's reported that on the 15th of September, you were informed about the deepening problem at Manston, and that you were likely to be in breach of the law. That was the 15th of September, so you'd been in post, I think, 9 days when you were given a submission to say there was a problem. Then I understand you were given a second submission on the 22nd of September, saying there was a very high risk that you were in breach of the law, 50 to 70%. Then on the 1st of October, you were again told there was a very high risk that you were in breach of the law. And then on the 4th of October, again, 50 to 70% you were in breach of the law. And the advice was that the Home Office does not have power to detain while waiting for onward accommodation or welfare reasons. So are those correct? That's been in the press, leaked documents from the Home Office.
Well, I'm afraid I'm
You're not
I'm not going to comment on leaks, and I'm not going to comment on the specifics of legal advice,
Okay.
whether the fact or the content of it. That's not how government works.
The judicial review that have been launched already, I'm assuming these papers will all have to be made available for the judicial review. So we will know whether what I've just read out to you is correct.
We will fulfil our duty of candour, and we will make sure that the courts receive the relevant papers.
Okay, can I just ask a question? In the letter you wrote to me, Home Secretary, about your reason that you resigned in October.
Madam Chair, can I just finish off one point? I think it's important that I need to explain, because I haven't really had a chance to fully explain in response to that. Very briefly, very briefly. So, of course, I'm very aware of legal duties to accommodate incoming migrants, their welfare, their safety. That is an important duty, and there are restrictions on the power of the government to detain people or carry out checks. I have also competing duties. I have duties to ensure that people don't become destitute. So releasing people to no fixed abode or to no address is not something that I'm willing to do. I have duties to the local community where Manston is. I'm not willing to put in jeopardy people living in the local community with migrants with no accommodation or no place to stay. That would not be a prudent use of powers or duties for the local community. There are lots of competing and challenging interests here in that decision. It is not a straightforward,
But the Home Office lawyers on the 4th of October told you that the Home Office does not have power to detain while waiting for onward accommodation and welfare reasons. That's the specific advice that we understand you were given on the 4th of October. Can I just ask you then about this meeting on the 19th of October? This was the date you resigned. And in the letter to me, you say that as part of your meetings that morning, you had a critical operational meeting about the developing situation at Manston. Can you just explain what was that meeting about?
Well, I don't want to go into too much detail about private government matters, but that does reflect the fact that, I was very aware of the developing situation at Manston. We were having almost daily meetings with Dan, with General Stuart Skeets, who I put in place earlier in the month to deal with the crisis, as I defined it, at Manston, to put up emergency accommodation, to provide shelter for people coming in.
Were you told again at that meeting that you were in breach of the law?
I'm not going to comment, as I said, on the content of legal advice that I may or may not have been given.
Thank you. Okay, could I ask the Permanent Secretary, when did your officials notify the Home Secretary that there was no respectable legal argument to justify the situation at Manston?
Well, without commenting on leaked operas, I can confirm that the Home Office legal advice has been flowing freely to the Home Secretary throughout this time, and indeed to her predecessor and predecessors, and that, of course, will continue.
Okay, because obviously the next day we have a new Home Secretary, and that Home Secretary says that the Home Office was in danger of breaching the law, and he took immediate action to rectify the situation. And he talked about the no respectable legal argument. That's the Home Secretary.
And what's
he
your
said that.
question?
This is to the Permanent Secretary.
Right.
So by the 20th, the legal advice had changed?
No, the legal advice has been consistent, and I can confirm that this Home Secretary and other Home Secretaries have been aware of that advice and have taken it into account in their decisions.
Oh, so just so I'm clear then, so you're saying it was the same legal advice to this Home Secretary in her first tenure, and then to Grant Shapps when he took up tenure as Home Secretary?
Well, the law didn't change. I mean, some circumstances would have changed that would have meant that updated legal advice would be needed. But I mean, the essence of the legal advice would not change because it's based on founding principles.
Okay. And just finally, I just wanted to ask you, Home Secretary. I know you've explained that you came into post and you were faced with this issue around Manston and the numbers coming across on the small boats. Could you just say to me, could you just tell the committee, how did the Home Office get itself into this mess with up to 4,000 people being detained at Manston? Who, as Home Secretary, obviously you carry the can for this, so is it your responsibility? Is it a previous Home Secretary? Is it Grant Shapps for his short tenure as Home Secretary? Whose fault is it that we had this crisis?
Well, I think that's a fair question. I'm not going to point the finger of blame at any one person. It's not as simple as that. As I've been clear, I arrived in full awareness that there was a growing problem at Manston with the numbers arriving. That's combined with very limited housing stock, which is available to people to transfer them on from Manston. We've had, we worked incredibly quickly and intensively during the month of September and October and ever since to procure extra accommodation. And since the 6th of September, over 100 new hotels providing 9,000 additional bed spaces have been brought into use. We had high levels coming in. We have been aided by the fact, as Dan says, by very low levels of people arriving. And that's given us
It's not your fault.
Listen, I don't think it's helpful to point the finger of fault at anyone. This is a bigger problem. I'll tell you who's at fault.
Yeah.
It's very clear who's at fault. It's the people who are breaking our rules, coming here illegally, exploiting vulnerable people, and trying to abuse the generosity of the British people. That's who's at fault.
But as Home Secretary, in terms of making the system work and the processing centre at Manston, there was clearly a big problem. So I'm just trying to work out who was responsible for not foreseeing that problem, not dealing with that problem. Who was it? Were you responsible?
Well, as the Home Secretary, I do take the responsibility ultimately for the performance of the Home Office. That is my job and that is my responsibility. But I'm very clear at who's at fault. It's the people coming here illegally, people smugglers, people who are choosing to take an illegal and dangerous journey to come here for economic reasons. They should not be doing that. And that's who's at fault here. We are responding to a problem caused by other people.
I hear that.
We are procuring as
that.
fast as possible within our resources and our capacity to identify that accommodation.
But the process, that's what I'm interested in. The Home Office process did not work, it failed. So I'm just trying to work out why that was and who was responsible. Because these numbers were foreseeable. Hotels were available. Why did you end up with a position of 4,000 people at Manston?
I think I've said everything I need to say, but we had a confluence of unprecedented numbers here. We've worked intensively to procure extra accommodation. I put in place General Stuart Skeets in October to help us grip the situation and operationalise it. He's worked very closely with Dan and other colleagues at Border Force to improve the capacity at Manston. And thankfully, largely because of that very intensive effort that I oversaw, but also because of zero inflow, we've been able to get the numbers down to zero.
Okay, but there was still a major crisis at the site. Okay, Tim Lawton.
Thank you, Chair. Home Secretary, welcome to the committee. We're a very friendly committee, really.
Of course.
Can I ask you one general question, and then I want to go into the recent increase in numbers coming across the channel. Just a bit of role play. I'm a 16-year-old orphan from an East African country escaping a war zone and religious persecution. And I have a sibling legally in the United Kingdom at the moment. What is a safe and legal route for me to come to United Kingdom?
Well, we have, you're fleeing which country, sorry?
Any African country.
Any African country. Well,
Could be any continent, but let's say any African country. I don't want to name one because then their Prime Minister might have a go at me for demonising their population. So let's just theoretically talk about an African country which is going through a period of turbulence and which is persecuting its citizens, including an innocent 16-year-old like me.
well, we have an asylum system, and people can put in applications for asylum.
How would I do that?
Well, you can do it through the safe and legal routes that we have. We have offered 390,000 places to people seeking safety from various countries around the world.
I'm not Syrian, I'm not Afghan, I'm not Ukrainian, not any of those specific schemes. The Dove scheme is historic. What scheme's open to me?
Well, if you are able to get to the UK, you are able to put in an application for asylum.
I would only enter the UK illegally then, wouldn't I?
Well, that would, if you put in your application for asylum upon arrival, that would be the process that you enter.
How could I arrive in the UK if I didn't have permission to get onto an aircraft legally to arrive in the UK?
Let me just invite other colleagues if there's anything they want to add.
I mean, you could engage with UNHCR. I mean, depending which country you're from, you could engage with UNHCR, and that would be a way of getting leave to enter the UK in order to put in an asylum claim. But I accept that there are some countries where that would not be possible.
I think the point is that there's a shortage of safe and legal routes other than for specific groups of people that we have generously offered safe haven to. But let me come on to the recent increased numbers coming across the channel. You've said it's unprecedented, 40,000 people come across the channel trying to enter the UK clandestinely in that way. Almost a third have come from Albania, and that figure of over 12,000 now is up from just 52 years ago. Why do you think they are trying to come to the United Kingdom?
Well, I think I should say at the outset that we do value our relationship with Albania and the Albanian community in the United Kingdom, and we continue to welcome those Albanians who travel to the UK legally and who contribute significantly to British society. We are seeing, as you say, large numbers of Albanian, largely men, risking their lives, making this dangerous journey to come here through illegal means. Your question is why? I might ask Dan, because he is literally on the front line and he is dealing with many people coming through firsthand. We've seen a variety of claims made by Albanians. We see a lot of them making modern slavery claims, claiming to have been victims of trafficking. We see a lot of Albanian people making asylum claims, despite the fact that Albania is not a country in conflict or in war. I think I've seen some journalism recently that has identified Albanian people who have come and who have, of their own admission, said that they are coming for economic reasons. So I think there's a mixture of reasons why.
But none of those are reasons why they need to come to the UK rather than another safe country if Albania is not a safe country, which we think it is, and EU countries think it is. So how come we have over 12,000 Albanian citizens applying for asylum in most cases, or being victims of so-called modern slavery in others, and yet Germany and Sweden, for example, will not recognise any asylum claims from Albania? Why are we not following suit?
Yep. Well, I think that, so Albanian nationals have been one of the nationalities most frequently referred to the national referral mechanism.
The most frequently, in fact.
Yes, absolutely, since it was established in 2014. And they are the most common nationality referred, which is continuing that trend. you've asked why are we not dealing with Albanians in the same way as other European counterparts. I think there are a mixture of reasons when we make international comparisons, and it's not necessarily straightforward as saying, well, Germany presumes Albania, it doesn't accept asylum claims from Albania. They might have just a high threshold or a...
It doesn't recognise asylum claims from Albania, nor does Sweden. So why are we so different from those two countries that we are entertaining over 12,000 people, most of which have got asylum claims from a stable country?
If I may, I mean, one of the really important things to say about Germany and other countries like that is, of course, they're in the Schengen area, and there are land borders between Albania and those countries. So it certainly wouldn't be true to say that there aren't a lot of Albanian people working illegally in those countries, albeit the asylum grant rate is very low. I think the difference between that and the small boats phenomenon is that we have a very large number of people turning up at one location in Dover, who are then, because of the level of control we have over those arrivals, are then forced to make a decision about whether they claim asylum or not. The grant rate for asylum for Albanian males is actually very low in the UK. It's about 12%. So certainly, if you look at it in the round, including families and that sort of thing, it is higher. But it's certainly not true to say that there isn't a similar problem. And the Home Secretary is absolutely right, because of the issue with the national referral mechanism scheme and the way that it's being exploited. That is an incentive for.
Okay, I understand. We treat Albanians coming here differently to other countries. The overwhelming of the migration system recently, particularly the impact on Manston, I think we all agreed, is largely due to the very large increase in a short space of time of a group of Albanians. So if the acceptance rate is so low, and we do accept asylum claims, how many Albanians have been removed to Albania out of those 12,000 plus who come this year, 800 last year, 50 the year before? How many applications for victims of modern slavery have been accepted? And of those that have been accepted, how many have been removed back to Albania, having recognised their claims of being victims of modern slavery, which does not require us to act then as hosts in the United Kingdom for those people?
So I can give you some of those numbers. So there have been 1,000 Albanians returned to Albania who are foreign national offenders and the like since the agreement we signed with Albania last year.
National offenders and the like, how many of those are not national offenders? I'm only concerned about people coming
of the cohort of Albanians that have come through Manston in the last few weeks. We've removed 36 of those directly back to Albania. And you may have read the interview with one of them in the BBC this week, which I thought was very compelling. There have been 2,916 Albanian referrals to the NRM until August 2022 this year, which will include all of those arriving by small boat.
Okay, so the point, come back to you, Home Secretary, a very large portion of Albanians who have a very low success rate on asylum claims and who may have a higher success rate on slavery claims, but do not require to be kept in the United Kingdom. Indeed, a case can be made that they are safer back amongst friends and family and being protected by their own government, rather than subject to people traffickers and the slavers in the United Kingdom who are controlling them. A very small portion have actually been removed. We have a special arrangement with Albania set up by the previous Home Secretary last year. What has that actually achieved? How many Albanian officials from the police or their equivalent of border force are currently stationed in the United Kingdom and aiding in the speedy removal of Albanians? And what measures are you taking to fast track Albanians on the basis that we all, I think, recognise that they aren't, in most cases, genuine asylum seekers who need to be kept in the United Kingdom? Multitude of questions there.
Yes, a lot of questions there. Well, I think that I think this is part of the problem that we're trying to fix. There's a high number of people coming from Albania making asylum claims and making modern slavery claims, and the reality is that our legal framework is allowing those claims to be made and then processed, and you can really see that when it comes to modern slavery. A few years ago, it would take on average approximately 40 days before a decision would be made on modern slavery grounds. Now, because the system has been overwhelmed, largely by people coming here illegally on small boats, it's now taking over 400 days. So, and the law in our Modern Slavery Act obliges the state to carry out an assessment of someone's modern slavery claim. So that is one of the challenges that we are facing legally. A very high number of people coming here from Albania are claiming legislation, are claiming rights which are provided for in our legislation. And
What have you done about it?
legal duties.
This was a problem a year ago, and it was identified as a problem by your predecessor, and special arrangements were made with Albania. Since then, the number of Albanians coming here has gone up by a multiple of 15. So what have you done, and what did your predecessor do to make the situation any better? Because it's got 15 times worse.
Well, there has been, in terms of what I am doing, perhaps you or Dan want to talk about the returns agreement struck with Albania and how that's actually played out.
So let me add a couple of things to what Home Secretary said. So first of all, we have enforced the return of over 2,300 people to Albania since 2019. Just last week, we returned another 26, including some straight from Amsterdam, as Dan was describing. We are working very closely with our colleagues from Albania, and as the Home Secretary said, we have a shared interest in preventing this sort of irregular migration into the UK.
We have a shared interest, we're working closely. What does that mean?
Well,
how many Albanians are here? How many Albanian officials are in this country at the moment working in the Home Office or Border Force?
We work really very closely both in the UK and in Albania with officials right from the front line up to the ministerial level. And we have an Albanian police officer who's deployed at Manston actually on the ground. My teams work very closely with the embassy in the UK.
Okay, so there's one police officer, there's one Albanian police officer at Manston, who presumably at the moment is not got much to do because it's empty. How many other Albanian police officers or Albanian officials are in the UK at the moment?
I mean, I don't have the exact number, but what I can say
is 10, 100, 1,000, roughly.
We'll get an answer to you, Mr. Lawton, but what I can speak to is the extremely high level of very constructive operational cooperation with
a
Albania.
Key feature announced by the previous Home Secretary was that we would be working very closely with the Albanian authorities. There was a streamlined agreement to return those who had not got legitimate claims, and that officials would be boots on the ground, working alongside UK officials, co-located in order to help that process. So far, we've identified one who's here. I don't believe there are any others here. Commander Amani, you know probably how many there are here because you're working with all these people. There aren't any more here, are there? There's one at Manston and that's it.
Sorry, I don't agree with that, Mr. Lawton. I don't know the exact number, but I know that my team are meeting with officials from the embassy and from the
I'm not talking about diplomats. I'm talking about border officials and police officials specifically posted over here, as announced by our previous Home Secretary last year, as a beefed up measure to deal with the immediate and growing problem of Albanians coming here without due process.
I think the important thing from my point of view is the operational impact of what we're doing. So there is live data exchange going on between the UK and teams in Tirana on Albanians who arrive in the UK, both on their documents and progressing to taking their biometric details to see if they have criminal records in Albania. That is a very, very impactful move. And we have a police officer deployed in Manston who is helping us with the cultural awareness and the understanding of exactly who these people are and what their likely intentions are. The operational impact of that is really significant. And I think that, giving you a number probably underplays that really significantly because particularly when we look at the cooperation.
Others want to come in. Can you answer the specific question of how many Albanians who've had a claim processed, and I realise there are many still in the system, for modern day slavery, have had that claim upheld, but they have been located back to Albania because it's been deemed safe to do that? Have any actually been relocated back to Albania after that claim has been determined in that way?
So I look into the number of Albania returns, and the total number of people that we returned to Albania since November 2021 is 1,435. That's the number that I've been given here. But what I would say in answer to your question as to why, notwithstanding our agreement with Albania, we are still finding it difficult. That number is very small compared to the number of people actually arriving here. Why is that? Why are we not able to return more pursuant to our agreement? The reason is that if someone from Albania has a legal claim pending, whether it be modern slavery or asylum, that trumps any agreement we may have with Albania. And that puts
understand
a pause.
that. It was a specific question. Have anybody with modern slavery claims been returned to Albania? I believe the number is 0. If that's wrong, will you please write to us to tell us? Because your officials confirmed, when Commander Mani was here in a recent session, that determination of a modern-day slavery claim is not then leading to a mandatory grant of leave to remain in the United Kingdom, and there are reasons why they could be more safely then protected by being returned to Albania, and I would hope that part of the agreement would facilitate that. Perhaps if we could be told if that is happening, because I suspect it's not. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Diana.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to ask the Home Secretary about the Migration and Economic Development Programme agreement with Rwanda, which was announced earlier this year. We know that you've been quoted as saying, I would love to have the front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda. That is my dream, it's my obsession. Do you know what happened when Israel tried this?
Well, I mean, we can always look to international comparisons, and I think it's a very mixed picture when you look at how different countries have tried to deal with the complex challenge of illegal migration. So if you're asking about what my view is of our agreement with Rwanda, I'm very committed to it.
Do you know what happened when Israel did this? Because this is your dream, this is your obsession. I would have thought that you would have looked into what happened when other countries tried to do it.
Well, I do know that Israel, I don't know the details, but I do know that Israel had some kind of arrangement with Rwanda. It was tentative, but it didn't ultimately work. I also know that other countries have had more successful analogous experiences. If you look at Australia, for example, they did have a very multifaceted approach to their challenge with their illegal migration, and when they were able to start removing people to another different part of the territory, they that was a partial factor in their ability to combat the problem. So I think there's a very mixed picture if you look at international examples. What I'm focused on is our UK experience. I think that the agreement that the UK struck with Rwanda is groundbreaking. It is in both our countries' interests. It is something that it will take us forward. We are currently engaged in litigation on the issue, but I'm very confident that we will be able to operationalise it as soon as possible.
You said that Israel only sent a few people.
No, I didn't say that, no. I said ultimately, I don't think. Sorry?
How many people do you think Israel sent?
I don't know exactly because.
All right. Well, the Israeli scheme was between 2014 to 2017. They sent thousands of people over there. But when Israeli researchers went to Rwanda in 2018, what they found was of those thousands of people, only 7 remained. So it wasn't very successful, was it, Home Secretary?
Well, I've been upfront, this is anything you want to say, but I note the Israeli example. It's, I don't think that necessarily has to dictate what the UK experience will be. This is a different agreement. This is in a different set of circumstances. And we have been very clear that we are confident about the terms of our agreement with Rwanda, and I'm very confident about the effect that it will have.
And can I ask you, are you also confident that Rwanda is a safe country to send people to?
Well, I have actually visited Rwanda twice, quite a while ago, around 2010, 2009, and I've always found Rwanda to be a very inspiring country. Actually, we would only ever work with countries that we assess to be safe and that we assess will treat asylum seekers in accordance with relevant human rights law. And our own safety assessment of Rwanda and their asylum process has found that it is fundamentally a safe and secure country with a track record of supporting asylum seekers. So, and that is reflected in our country policy information note, which is published on our government website.
Are you aware, Home Secretary, that Human Rights Watch and the US State Department, which is scarcely somebody who you can ignore, they have said that the things that single Rwanda out is arbitrary detention, ill treatment, torture in official and unofficial detention, which is commonplace, and fair trial standards are routinely flouted. Are you saying the US State Department is wrong?
Well, Rwanda, I mean, the facts are that Rwanda already hosts hundreds of thousands of refugees from the region.
That the US State Department is wrong.
Well, our evidence and our view and our assessment of the safety and security of Rwanda is different. We say, looking at Rwanda's track record and our assessments, that actually, as I say, Rwanda already hosts is a safe and secure country with a track record of supporting over 130,000 refugees, including through the UN Refugee Agency, who they themselves said the country has a safe and protective environment for refugees. So we would only work with countries who have a safe and secure basis for accommodating asylum seekers. And there's nothing in the UN Refugee Convention which prevents removal to a safe country.
So you are dismissing Human Rights Watch and the US State Department. I'm just trying to get it clear. You're dismissing what they have to say.
I haven't seen their documents and their views, so I don't really want to comment specifically on the content.
Before you became Home Secretary, in saying that you 100% supported the scheme.
I do support the scheme. There has been rigorous investigation into the arrangements and the conditions in Rwanda. Rwanda will process claims in accordance with its international obligations under the UN Refugee Convention. It will ensure protection from inhumane and degrading treatment. As I say, it has already and is already a safe and secure country for refugees from the region, and it hosts the EU-funded UNHCR emergency transit mechanism. So I don't think those are institutions that would use Rwanda for those purposes if there were serious doubts about its viability.
And are you confident that you can send migrants there who are unwilling to go?
The policy that we have put in place when it comes to Rwanda is that they will be moved there and their asylum claim will be determined in Rwanda.
I understand the policy you put in place. I'm asking something quite specific. Are you confident that you can send migrants there if they are unwilling to go?
Yes.
And you're aware that in the when the Israelis tried this in 2017, the Israeli Supreme Court struck it all down, saying you simply could not send people unwillingly. I accept that's the Israeli Supreme Court, but it's not irrelevant to what you're trying to do. So you're telling this committee that you're completely confident that you can send migrants to Rwanda unwillingly. I just want it on the record.
It's not for me to comment on the rights or wrongs of another sovereign nation's laws and arrangements. And I respect the Israeli court decision and their arrangements.
That, Home Secretary. In a sense, you're diverting from my question. Are you able to go on the record in front of this committee and say that you can send migrants to Rwanda if they are not willing to go?
Well, I mean, the whole purpose of the scheme that we set up with Rwanda is to send people there who have arrived here illegally for their asylum claims to be processed. Whether they are willing or unwilling, they will either put in a legal claim, and that will be upheld or it will be dismissed. And that's the basis upon which, if we have the legal basis to do so, we will deliver the Rwanda scheme as fully as possible.
There are many other members that want to put questions. I'm just going to ask you for the last time, are you confident that you can legally send migrants to Rwanda who are unwilling to go?
What I would say is, I mean, we are in the process of litigation at the moment. There are live legal questions which are going to be resolved by a court. Let's wait to see what the court says and what the outcome of litigation is. It wouldn't be, we've made our position very clear in court. We have confidence in the Rwanda scheme, and if we are successful in litigation, then we will be delivering the Rwanda scheme at pace.
Thank you. Just before I come to Stuart MacDonald, perhaps the Permanent Secretary might be able to tell us whether he is now satisfied of the value for money of the Rwanda scheme, because he obviously got a ministerial direction on the point of value for money. We understand another £20 million has been spent. So perhaps you're able to confirm whether you've now reached a conclusion on that or not?
Well, I keep that judgment under constant review, as you would expect, and the circumstances have not changed sufficiently for me to change my judgment, which from April, as you will recall, was that we did not have evidence that it would be value for money, which is not the same thing as saying it will not be value for money. It was just we were waiting to see what the evidence would be. As you have said, the UK has paid 120 million plus now an additional 20 million for set-up costs to the government of Rwanda. And it remains the case that it could be value for money and it could not be. I will repeat my commitment to this committee and to your sister committee, the Public Accounts Committee, to update you when the circumstances change to require me to change that assessment.
I will look forward to that. Okay.
But I think it is worth underlining that the purpose of the scheme is deterrence, it's prevention. The success of the scheme will not be measured in how many thousands of people are relocated to Rwanda, but more in how many thousands of people do not make the dangerous crossing of the channel, putting their own and other people's lives at risk. That is the key metric to determine on value for money whether this scheme is successful or not.
And clearly the numbers have been going up this year since the announcement. Stuart MacDonald.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I want to talk about children in the asylum system, but first of all, just a couple of quick factual follow-ups from earlier discussions. When we visited Manston on the 8th of November, my notes tell me that there were at that stage 1,292 people there. Does that sound about right? Okay. So would it be possible for you then to write to the committee with details about how many people were in Manston each day, say from about the middle of August? That would be very helpful, because it has been a frustration that parliamentary questions from myself and from my colleagues haven't been answered. So if you can do that, that would be very helpful indeed. Secondly, Mr. O'Mahony, so you were speaking a little bit about the exceptional circumstances that justified extended detention earlier on. Again, my recollection from a visit was that we were essentially told that that process had been abandoned for a certain period. So were you saying that these were the exceptional circumstances that justified really abandoning that policy, or are you saying there was a decision made on every individual case to extend their detention and reasons were noted down and authority sought from the appropriate level of officer?
I'm not commenting on the legal advice or the legal status for the reasons that the Home Secretary has already outlined. So what I was illustrating were the choices that we were having to make. The choice about people staying there for longer than 24 hours versus essentially making
so I appreciate there was a call to be made, though I might dispute the extent to which there's a tension between those two duties. I'm just asking, as a matter of fact, where the Home Office in a position whereby essentially had to stop going through that process and just to say, well, people are going to have to stay here for 20 days, 30 days, however long it takes us to find accommodation. I don't know if you can comment, Mr. Rycroft. Is there a paper trail? Would I be able to see paper saying in each of these cases, I have sought authority from the appropriate level of officer to extend detention? My understanding from a visit was that was just abandoned because it was impractical.
I'm going to have to go away and look at that because I wasn't aware that you were told that during the visit. So I'll have to check the audit trail on that.
I might have picked up wrong, but do so just to have clarity on that. Further, just in relation to Albanians, obviously there is an issue, but in terms of context, I think I'm right in saying that the latest figures are 55% of Albanian asylum claims are accepted. Obviously, there's a huge disparity between men and women. Yeah. Also, so we've spoken about the modern slavery system as well. So, I mean, it's the Home Office itself that refers people into the national referral mechanism. So it's not as if people can make spurious claims and somehow enter that system. 97% of those claims are accepted. And what is it that Home Office guidance says about conditions for victims of trafficking in Albania and how Albania lives up to its obligations under international conventions? I don't know if you can comment on that, Mr. Nycroft.
And I think it is fair to say that we do have evidence that the system is subject to abuse, because you can see that the time at which in an individual's process when they make the claim to be a victim of modern slavery, and you know, very regularly it is only at the point when their asylum claim would otherwise be refused.
Yeah, but there are a whole host of reasons for that. You know, I mean, it's well established that victims of modern slavery will take a long time to disclose these things. And I mean, who on earth is aware of the modern slavery legislation when they first arrive in the country? You know, so it's not as simple as saying they made that claim at the end of their time here. You're still accepting that 97% of them are actually victims of modern slavery.
Well, as the Home Secretary was discussing with Mr. Lawton earlier, I mean, the big difference in the UK's system and, say, Germany's is the national referral mechanism. The Modern Slavery Act is very victim-focused and very significant rights to victims, and that is good for genuine victims, but it does mean that it is open to
97% are accepted as genuine victims, 97%. Correct?
I don't recognise that figure, it is definitely open to abuse, and so the government is looking at ways to address
Right,
that
evidence
abuse.
then, because that's what folk are asking for. I mean, the last trafficking commissioner that was imposed, was still waiting for a reappointment, says no evidence of this. So provide evidence. And you can come back to me if you think my 97%.
If I may just add something as well about what we've learned from the practical experience, is that I think that the grant rate is high. We can get back to you on the specific number. But
It's a recognition rate.
Well, conclusive grounds rate, the final decision on claim on slavery is high. But what I would also say is, I think there is evidence of abuse. It's not just in this cohort.
I've heard that, but I want to see it.
Well, I'll also give you some examples. I mean, we also see it when it comes to foreign national offenders, in people who've been incarcerated after serving sentences, for very serious crimes, and after many years on the point of removal, it's interesting that they suddenly remember that they're now victim of modern slavery. I perceive that, and you are a fellow immigration lawyer as well in your past life. I do see that as an abuse, I'm afraid.
So I'll listen to you when you're able to show me that these people were aware of their right to claim to victims of modern slavery earlier on in the sentence, and then we may be able to agree on that. But anyway, let's turn to children, so I'm using up all my time on supplementary questions. So I think we all agree on the importance of deciding who is a child is very, very important. There is obviously a refugee council report that suggested 94% of a cohort that they worked with successfully challenged Home Office assertions that children were adults. Various other reports don't have as high a figure as that, but there's certainly a big suggestion that the Home Office gets this wrong far too often. The problem I have is that the Home Office doesn't seem to follow through and record what exactly happens with age assessments that are challenged. What's your view on that, Home Secretary? I think there's more we can do in terms of gathering data. Surely we could agree on that.
Well, I've been interested in the age assessment processes when it comes to asylum-seeking children, so typically the UK receives over 3,000 asylum claims from unaccompanied asylum-seeking children every year. Between 2016 and 2021, there were over 6,000 cases where age was disputed and subsequently resolved, with 58% found to be adults. I consider that to be quite a high proportion of people claiming to be children and subsequently being found to be adults.
But my problem is that, as I understand, that figure says it's 58% the Home Office decide are adults, and then actually when you go through the challenge, we don't know how many end up actually being found to be children, because you don't take a central note of that. So from that cohort of the Refugee Council, 94% of those that you have deemed to be adults actually are children. others, as I say, don't have as high a figure as that, but you don't have any record of that. You just assert the Home Office has decided that 50% are adults, and that's all you know. Mr. Rycroft, am I wrong?
Well, we're changing that system, and the National Standards Board has brought in a new approach of a National Age Assessment Board, which, when after commencement of those provisions of that Act, will consist of expert social workers whose task will be to conduct age assessments after a local authority refers.
It's vital for our ability to know whether or not the Home Office is getting this right, that you guys, so you say 58% of these folk we think are adults, but then you also need
It's not just someone just sort of plucking a judgment out of the air. There is a process that has gone through with expertise.
I have concerns with that process. We'll come to in a little second, but you don't record what actually happens. 58% of them, 94% in that particular cohort were eventually found to be children. Surely we can at least agree that you should have a central database of that so we can assess whether the Home Office is doing its job properly. I just ask you to look at that. Surely that's something we agree would be useful to know. Are the Home Office assertions that people are adults actually standing up to scrutiny? That suggests absolutely not. So surely, if you want to combat my view, you have to say, no, that's not right, because we have followed this through, and actually the Home Office decisions have been upheld in 80%.
But when it comes down to, as Colonel was saying, the rules that are being applied at facilities like Manston, when people arrive, they claim to be a child, they go through some checks. Those checks ultimately are resulting in 58% of them not being well-founded claims to be children. The Nationality and Borders Act does bring in new guidance, a more rigorous approach to age assessment.
That's according to two border guards who speak to me for 40 minutes. I have to say I was not impressed with that aspect of Manston's law. I perfectly understand that Manston, but I wasn't impressed by that. Have you investigated the claims that children arriving at Manston were pressured into saying that they were, or encouraged to say that they were adults so that they would go to hotels? That again comes from the Refugee Council with a recording of a conversation with an immigration officer.
No, I haven't heard. I don't recognise that there's encouragement by officials to make particular claims. What I do know in terms of the data is the breakdown by age of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. The vast majority of unaccompanied asylum children are 16 or 17 years old, but 90% of them are male. That I just offer that as for factual context.
Yeah, but back to my questions, Mr. Rycroft, has anything happened as a result of those allegations? Was there an investigation or any guidance issued?
I'll have to check that specific question, Mr. McDonald, but what I can say is that clearly there are some incentives for some people who are actually adults to claim to be children, and there are other incentives for other people who are actually children to claim to be adults, and we want to reduce both of those.
Is it your policy at the moment placing age-restricted children into hotels?
Well, our policy is that people who claim to be children, we have a responsibility for them, and ideally, our aim is for children and unaccompanied asylum-seeking children to be placed through local authorities into foster care. Unfortunately, there is a national shortfall of available foster care placements, and therefore we do have to put as a default option unaccompanied asylum-seeking children into hotels. They are, when they're in those hotels, supported by team leaders, support workers, social workers, and we try and pack a lot of support for these children.
We just seem to be struggling to understand what it is they're supposed to do. So, for example, if a security guard is spoken to by somebody at a hotel, or migrant help get a call from somebody who's at a hotel and they say, I am a child, and so NGOs and these people seem to not be absolutely clear what it is that's supposed to happen at that stage.
If they are children, as Home Secretary said, there is a very significant amount of wraparound support that is available, including education, health, safeguarding, and other expertise from people whose full-time job it is to provide that support.
If somebody hasn't been able to access that, then who do they contact?
Well, they have a right to access that, and they should access that, and I think that their route to ensure they are accessing that would be through migrant help. I think it would depend on the precise circumstances, the particular local authority they were in, and so on.
Is there a specific safeguarding policy for children?
Yes.
Okay. And what does it say in relation to who children can share with in hotels? Because I think there's quite clear rules around who can share with who in the special accommodation, but I can't find them in relation to hotels.
Okay, we can check that and write to you as well.
And finally, I know you can't say very much about the death at Manston, obviously, I absolutely understand. Could I first of all ask what steps have been taken to support staff there, because that will be a traumatic experience for them, also other detainees, and also seek assurances that those who may have information about what happened are being kept track of. There was an incident, obviously, where Home Office got in trouble for removing people who might have had information relevant to an inquest.